Hello everyone and welcome to the final of the Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge. It's Daniil Dubov versus Hikaru Nakamura. After those wild semi-final matches, Dubov versus Dingliren and Magnus versus Nakamura, now we are in the finals. And before we check out the game, this is game 1 of their first match. Here's their head-to-head score up until this point. So there we have it. In classical games, Hikaru Nakamura tied Dubov 0-0 with 2 draws. However, if we check out only rapid slash exhibition games, Hikaru Nakamura defeated Daniil Dubov 4-1 with 5 draws. So in classical, it's a tie, but in rapid and exhibition games, Nakamura has the lead. So without further ado, let's check it out, as already game 1 is very, very exciting. Now Dubov with the white pieces opened with the d4. We have knight to f6 by Hikaru, c4 e6, knight to f3 and d5. We go into the queen's gambit declined, knight to c3 and bishop to e7. So similar to what Magnus and Nakamura played. However, Dubov develops his bishop to g5, not to f4 like Magnus did. And okay, we have h6 challenging the bishop, bishop to h4, and Nakamura castles. We have queen to c2 and c5 now, striking in the center. D captures on c5 and d captures on c4. We have e3 by Dubov, preparing to recapture the pawn here. And there is one game in the database where queen to a5 was played. It was played in the game Petrosian versus Lerner in the 1983 Moscow Championship. The game ended in a draw. However, here knight to a6 by Nakamura, and it is a new move. So already as of move 9, we have a completely new game, preparing just to recapture on c5. So we have bishop captures on c4 and knight captures on c5. We have castles by Dubov and a6 now, preparing b5 to start the expansion in the center, or b6 for that matter, if you want to wait with b5. We have rook f to d1, challenging the queen, and queen to e8 now, and the bishop back to e2. So now b5 will not come with tempo. We have b6 instead. Nakamura prepares to fianchetto the light square bishop here, and now b4, just forcing that knight to move away. Knight c to d7, and now knight to d4, getting the knight to a nicer central square, also freeing up the f3 square for the bishop, so you can utilize the bishop on this long diagonal. Bishop to b7 by Nakamura, and now queen to b2. With queen to b2, you are preparing b5, which will grab a lot of space on the queen side. However, it will give up the control of the c5 square. So it's a double-edged idea. Nakamura goes for rook to c8, gets his rook to the open c file, and now not rook 8 to c1, but rather this instant b5. So like we said, this could pose problems. For example, if you allow this capture, then the b6 pawn will be very weak, or if Hikaru trades here, but Hikaru instead just goes a5. He says, okay, I'm not worried about this, and I now get the c5 square for my knight, my bishop, and whatever I choose. And now it seems like the critical idea here is knight to c6 for Dubov. And it's quite the idea, and it involves a temporary pawn sacrifice with captures, captures, and captures. However, you will get a lot of development in. For example, bishop to b5. Now you have to be careful, as there will be some pressure going on here. So rook c7, now bishop g3, attacking the rook, and let's say e5. And now comes rook 8 to c1. Point is, on the next move you will capture here, and you will be able to regain your pawn. For example, with queen c8, then you get bishop captures on d7, and now you cannot capture with the knight to keep on defending the e5 pawn, because knight d5 wins the game for white. If you capture with the rook, then first knight captures with check, and only then you recapture. So what you would have to do is capture with the rook, and then bishop captures on e5, wins back your pawn, and the game just continues. So this seems to be the critical idea, knight to c6. However, Dubov goes for knight to a4, puts pressure on the b6 pawn, and opens up the c file. Knight to d5 by Hikaru, and now bishop captures on e7. Here Hikaru offers some trades on e7, and he's asking, do you want to go back with bishop to g3, after which I will probably shift my bishop over to f6 to grab hold of this diagonal. So Dubov decides to trade here. We have bishop captures on e7, queen captures, and bishop to f3 now. Gets the bishop to this diagonal. And now knight to c5. Finally, the c5 square gets occupied by Hikaru's knight. Also, rook to c4 was a very nice idea here, as the knight is undefended, and you don't really have a good square for the knight. You cannot retreat the knight, and you cannot defend the knight with anything simply doesn't work. If queen to b3, you can just kick the queen away with a rook to b4. And on the other hand, we again get this line where again you have to sacrifice a pawn temporarily, captures, captures, and captures, and then you would get something like bishop captures on d5, e captures, and rook captures. So again, it was a possibility for black, where again you end up with this position with 2 pawns against 1 on the queen side. However, Nakamura goes for knight to c5 instead, and now we have knight captures on c5. You cannot go for bishop captures on d5 followed by winning the pawn, because if bishop captures, just knight captures attacks the queen, and you will now lose a piece, because on the next move you also lose the bishop. If you try something like queen b3 to attack the knight, first knight c5 attacks the queen, and only then do you recapture the bishop here, and you are up a piece. So after knight c5, we have knight captures on c5 by Dubov, rook captures on c5, and now knight to c6. Again, going for this sacrifice idea, with the idea that if captures, captures, and captures, you can just captures, captures, and of course captures, win back your pawn. However, Nakamura played bishop captures on c6, b captures, and now not captures right away, but first queen to c7. Not allowing this capture on d5, as for the moment both the rook and the pawn defend the knight. So it seems like on the next move Nakamura will just win a full pawn. So rook 8 to c1, Dubov doesn't really have a choice here, and now queen captures on c6. Dubov now trades, rook captures, queen captures, and bishop captures on d5, with e captures on d5 and rook to c1. Nakamura is now up a pawn, but Dubov will try to play against these 2 pawns, especially if you can maybe get a4 in to keep the pawn on b6. Should be playable. And okay, queen to d6 by Nakamura, and now g3. We have rook to d8, now preparing to push the pawn to d4, and queen to b5 now, with ideas of maybe rook to c6, followed by, just gobbling up all of the queenside pawns. We have d4, and now rook to c6 is definitely an idea here. However, if you go rook to c6, then queen to e7, and you don't really have time to go for this pawn, as d captures on e3 is coming, and even after captures and captures, you again don't have time to go after the pawn, so black would just be better. If you go after the pawn, then rook d1 check, king here, and queen check will just be over. You have to go to h3, now rook d5. The queen covers g2, this will just be a quick death for white. So after d4, we have e captures on d4. Sorry, let's just show it. E captures on d4 first, queen captures on d4, and only now rook to c6 by Dubov. However, Nakamura makes sure that that's never even a threat. He just goes queen to e4. Now, of course, any captures will be met with rook to d1, which will just instantly win the game since the queen covers the g2 square. So rook back to c1 by Dubov, and now queen to f3. Again, with some ideas of rook to d1 check. Also, maybe the rook can come to d2 to put pressure on f2. It depends on what white plays. So queen back to b1, not allowing this trade, and now not doing any rook lifts, because the rook to c8 will just be deadly since the queen covers the h7 square. So first g6, Hikaru makes some room for the king, and now h4 by Dubov. We have rook to d6 guarding the pawn, and black really doesn't have any problems here. We have queen to a1, now threatening check, and after the king moves, a rook to h8 checkmate, since the queen now covers the h8 square. So king to h7. Nakamura doesn't allow this, and of course if you go for a rook lift, then rook d1 check is just game over. So queen back to b1 by Dubov, and now h5. We have rook to e1, and now comes a4 by Nakamura. Now he will start to push his pawns. We have queen to b4, Dubov goes after the pawn, but now Nakamura just goes for the trade. Rook to d1, you don't have time to capture because of captures, so Dubov has to trade, captures with check, king h2, and now queen to c2, defending this pawn, putting pressure on both of these pawns. Dubov goes for queen captures on b6, which guards the f2 pawn, but now queen captures on a2. So now we're in a queen and pawn endgame where Nakamura is up a pawn, and usually queen and pawn endgames are super complicated. However, here where black king is very safe, the queen guards the f7 pawn, you just basically have to move the queen and start pushing your a pawn. It's not really a thriller, but you also of course have to be very careful. So Dubov played queen to f6. But Nakamura just kicks it away. Of course, every queen trade is favorable only to Nakamura. Queen back to c3, preventing a3, but now queen back to b3. this time with tempo, as white has to again make a queen move. So queen to f6, and now a3. The queen again nicely defends the f7 pawn, and now Dubov is without options. He has to go all in. g4, but now queen to e6 again, putting pressure on the pawn here, on the queen. So queen to f3, hoping for maybe ideas like queen captures on g4 and then queen captures here, which would result in a draw by repetition after queen f7, queen f8 check. But after queen to f3, Nakamura just played a2, and it was in this position that Daniil Dubov resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Whatever you play, it will be very easy to get the pawn into the game. Let's say if you try something like queen to c3 to guard this, then black has a variety of options of how to deal with this. You can capture on g4, you can pretty much do whatever you want. You're going to be up another pawn, and then it's just even more downhill from there. After a2, Dubov resigns, and game 1 of their first match goes to Hikaru Nakamura, who is one step closer to winning the finals of the Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge. That's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Valapanatan Kanapati Pillai, Shai Gross, Ashfaq Ahmad, Gabriel Luke, and Blaž Klaric for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge, the finals, until it finishes. Of course, checking up on your wonderful suggestions as well, and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.